All right, hey everyone. So I've been learning about software licensing for the last couple of days, and to help me remember it, maybe help some of you, I'm going to share everything I have learned about it. I didn't really know very much at the start of this. I had heard of MIT and GPL and stuff before, but I'd never been in a position to really need to make decisions about this, so I didn't really know much of the specifics between any of these or any of the concerns. And so here's what I learned. Um, so basically, open source licenses or software licenses are like legal documents, and they are there to define how your software can be used and the terms that people need to abide by when they use their software. And this needs to be stated explicitly because if nothing is done by default, at least in the U.S. legal system, the default state is that you make software and then you have the copyright on it. You have the sole copyright on it, and actually, in the absence of any documents giving like licenses or any kind of documents that give people permission to use it, no one else can actually use your software, I believe, or really do anything with it. I mean, you can publish it and stuff, but it doesn't necessarily give people the right to actually use it. And so, if you want people to use your software and have it be kind of legally sound, you need to actually give explicit permission for people to use the software, and that's what the license is for, detailing these terms of use, basically. So I learned that when you create software, you get the exclusive copyright to it, and then you kind of let people use it through the license. Another point that's important to know for open source is that when someone contributes to your project, those lines of code that they contribute, they own the copyright to those lines of code in your project. Actually, you don't automatically get them. And so what happens is that you actually, as you get contributors to your code base, you actually start to lose control over the copyright, which is not like a bad thing necessarily, but it's just important to know that this will have implications for your ability to do things like relicense or potentially dual license the code base, since for some actions you need to have either total control of the code base, aka like total copyright over the code base, or alternatively, you need to get permission from every single person that contributed to your code base, which is not practical. And so, in practice, for certain actions like relicensing and dual licensing, you actually need to have full control. We can talk about that a little bit later with CLAs and stuff. But as far as copyright and ownership, when you make the code, you own the copyright. If someone contributes lines of code to your project that you accept, they actually own the copyright to those. And we'll get back into that a little bit later with CLAs. But back to licensing. So licenses are, for open source projects, are either classified as restrictive or permissive, and restrictive is also called copyleft. So these restrictive copyleft licenses are called examples of these are like the GPL and Mozilla public license and the AGPL, MongoDB's special server-side public license would be considered copyleft. So these are the licenses that require, the basic summary is that they require users to also release their source. If you use a library that's GPL licensed in your application, you link to that GPL library, you need to release your source for that library. You also need to, if you modify the GPL library, you need to release all your modifications. And the idea is, this is like the free software movement thing, where like software should be shared, software should be freely shared, and everything should be released and stuff like that. And so that's kind of one side. It's the copyleft or restrictive licenses. They're restrictive because they place requirements on the users. The users must comply with these restrictions that they need to release their source. I think a common misconception that I had, at least, was I thought GPL kind of was like you can't had actually restrictions on whether you can even modify the source or not, or whether you can like use and modify the source or not. And that's actually not the case. The GPL and free software movement are they really want to encourage people to modify the source and do awesome things and share the software. So they're very much pro collaboration and source modification and stuff like that. All they want is that for everything to be public and nothing to stay proprietary or hidden, basically. And so that's one side of them. The copyleft, the restrictive licenses like GPL, AGPL, stuff like that, and a bit more detail on those. So there's two versions of GPL. There's GPL v2 and v3, and there's also AGPL, but the main GPL licenses, v2 and v3, are basically this canonical example of a copyleft license where they require release of source if you use them or modify them. And the technical way they put it is you need to relicense under the same license, which is effectively saying your project, kind of like downstream, your user of the library or whatever, needs to also be GPL, which effectively means it needs to release the source, because that's in one of the conditions of the GPL. And so yeah, there's two versions, v2 and v3. I understand that they are mostly similar, but v3 has some extra an extra patent related clause and some stuff related to TiVoization, which is related to like hardware lockdown. That's a reference to, I believe, the company TiVo that had hardware that was locked down or something. And so I don't actually know a lot of the specifics about that, but yeah, those are the two versions of GPL v2 and v3. There's the AGPL, which is an even more restrictive version of the GPL that expands the definition of kind of almost like software linking. And so in the normal GPL, if you have a GPL library that is linked to a application, and then that is like a web service, that application would need to be. Actually, let me think about this. It's about the definition of distribution, I believe. And so if you have an application that links to a GPL library, but it is in a web service, and so the web service is never actually like shipped to users, like the users never actually receive a distribution of the code. Under that situation, the creator of that app, that proprietary app that links to the GPL library, would not need to release their source of that app, or if they modify that library, they wouldn't need to release those changes because they're not distributing the changes. And that's actually a very key part of this whole GPL thing. It's really about the distribution. You're really only subject to all these restrictions when you're actually distributing the software. So you can always just take a GPL library onto your local machine, hack on it, modify it, and just play with it locally. And you don't have to release your source because you're never distributing those changes to anybody else. But as soon as you release software, release that software or release those changes, that is when you become subject to all these restrictions. And so again, yeah, distribution is a very key part of this. And so again, in that server-side web app thing with GPL, in that situation where you have the library and the app and and then the users interact with that over the network, you would not be required to release your app source code because you're not distributing. And so this was kind of seen as maybe a bit of a loophole in the GPL. And so that's what motivated the AGPL, which I'm not sure if it's in this list, but basically it expands the definition of distribution to include use over the network. And so if your library is licensed AGPL, and then an app links against this, and that's like a web app, and it's used over the network, that use over the network would count as distribution. So that would require you to release the source code of the app or any modifications you made to the library. And so it's even more restrictive, basically. And I should note that these copyleft licenses are seen as kind of like anti-business or are unusable in business contexts because effectively because they require releasing source code, and businesses don't like to release their source code because it might release trade secrets or whatnot, and they don't want to release everything out into the open. And so so these copyleft licenses are generally seen as kind of unusable in business contexts, and businesses don't like to use them, or they won't use them. And so if you want your project to be used in business contexts, you might want to avoid copyleft licenses because businesses can't or don't want to abide by these releasing source code restrictions of the license. And so and that actually kind of plays out into a very interesting story with MongoDB. And so MongoDB is perhaps one of the most famous companies to use the AGPL for their database, their open source MongoDB database. And let me just AGPL. Yeah, so they released this blog post. So they formally used the AGPL exactly for this reason I talked about, where they were seeing people take their database and like modify it and maybe change things and maybe improve it. Like I think maybe Amazon or something, AWS, used MongoDB with modifications, and they wanted Amazon to release those changes, but they didn't. So I think that's why they perhaps changed to the AGPL after that, or I don't exactly know the ordering of things, but at some point they were AGPL to explicitly address people using MongoDB in a modified form on the server side and never distributing it, and so they never released those changes to MongoDB. But actually, this appeared to not be strong enough, and so that actually motivated them to switch to a custom license of their own called the server-side public license, which is very close to the AGPL, but even more explicit. And it it's even just more explicit, because I think there were some ambiguities in the AGPL. But basically, they made this extremely explicit license that's very close in spirit to the AGPL with this whole like networked thing, and it restricts businesses from using this, from using their code on the server side and not releasing it. And so there's actually like a lot of controversy around this. And one of the more controversial parts of this is whether this counts as an open source license. And in fact, the official organization that does this stuff, which is the OSI, Open Source Initiative, they're the ones that actually like approve licenses as open source or not based on their definition of what open source is. And they actually rejected MongoDB's license. And so technically, MongoDB's database is no longer an open source project, even though it's on GitHub, they accept contributions and all this stuff. It's technically not open source anymore, which is an interesting thing. So that's all copyleft. I've been talking about copyleft this entire time. We can zoom back out and then go back to the other side of things, which is permissive, and that's stuff like the MIT, BSD variants. There's actually like 3 or 4 different variants of the BSD licenses, and the Apache too are kind of some of the most popular permissive licenses. Basically, the idea is that as opposed to copyleft, where there's these restrictions about how users need to release the source, that these permissive licenses just are permissive. They don't have these restrictions. They basically say you can take the source, you can take the code and use it basically however you want, including you don't have to release source. And so that's their kind of theme is real true kind of freedom of use, which is kind of interesting given that copyleft is associated with the free software movement, but these permissive licenses are even more on the side of freedom for the user. They want the user to have full control, to release source, to not release source, to do basically anything they want, but with a few restrictions which they document and which we can get into. Kind of at the end of this, I'll probably do a bit about choosing a permissive license. And so yeah. So those are permissive licenses. And so in general, when you're having your project and you need to choose a license, the first step is to generally just choose which side do you want to be on. Do you want to be on the copyleft side, which is good for making sure all the changes to your software and improvements are always released to the public, or do you want to be on the side of permissive, which is more for just absolute freedom, maximum usage of your software? Even if the improvements don't get released, you're okay with that. You just want your software to be used. Whereas with copyleft, you care more about the changes and improvements being released out into the world than trying to maximize the absolute usage of the software. And you're okay with maybe companies shying away from it or declining or rejecting it in their decision-making processes because you use the GPL. And so that's the first choice. Which side are you kind of on? Okay, and so let's see. The next thing one of the next interesting things I learned is about making money with open source. And so one thing I didn't really know is that both sides of this, copyleft and permissive, in general, all open source explicitly permits commercial use. That is part of like the core definition of open source, actually. There's this question: can open source be used for commercial purposes? Absolutely. All open source software can be used. The open source definition guarantees this. You can sell open source software. And so this is something I think that is overlooked or maybe misunderstood, but this is actually a core piece of releasing an open source project. The ability, let's see, the definition of open source guarantees this. No discrimination against fields. You can't restrict anyone from using the program in a specific field, like in business or whatever. So it needs to be available for any kind of use case. And so both sides, copyleft and permissive, allow people to profit off of your work, basically. And if that's something you don't want to do exactly, that's actually a very interesting topic, and we'll get into that kind of right now with dual licensing. And so both like GPL and MIT and all of these, they all explicitly include clauses that permits commercial use and selling the software. And so kind of the question is, well, one question I have is like, what if you don't really want to allow this? What if you want to make a software project and have it be open source, but also you you don't want to allow people to freely profit off of your work without giving you a cut. Like, what if, what if you felt like that? Is there anything you could do about this? Because what you would need to do is kind of restrict your users. Then you would need to restrict commercial use, except if you basically like pay me. And that seems to be kind of antithetical to open source, because again, we have this definition, all these licenses explicitly allow profit off of the open source project. And so how would you, is it possible to reconcile this kind of being open source versus being open source and also limiting commercial use, except if you pay me? And the answer is yes. And so that's this interesting thing called dual licensing, where you can take a project and you can actually offer a choice of multiple licenses for users. And as long as you have full control or full copyright over the project, there's no reason you can't do this. It's totally fine and acceptable. And so, so the way you would do this to implement our kind of evil scheme, where we want to be open source but also restrict users and make them pay us if they end up profiting off of our work, is we're going to do a dual licensing scheme between a copyleft license and our private commercial license. And so the copyleft one is going to be our typical like GPL or AGPL or whatever that requires people to release source. And the commercial one, and that one is, and the GPL is going to be it's going to be targeted for like hobbyists and the open source community and people that are playing around with it or just like kind of like hackers on the internet, as part of the community. The commercial one is our like private commercial software license that we probably need to get lawyers or something to draft for us, that talks about the money, talks about how if you use this and make profit, you need to give like a share of the profits back to us or something like that. And so that's the one targeted towards the businesses that will be using our code and profiting from it. And so the idea with these two licenses is that the businesses will not be able to use the GPL. It's unusable for them because then they would need to release their source. And so the only other alternative is to use our commercial license. So we can kind of force them into it that way. Of course, the other option is they just get annoyed with us and go find some other alternative that doesn't have, it doesn't force them to release their source or pay. But maybe we have a completely, totally unique project and there's no other options. And so in this situation, we can kind of, play hardball a little bit and force the companies into using our commercial license. And it's worth pointing out that this exploits kind of, so this exploits how the GPL is unusable for business, which is not the main intention of the GPL or the free software movement. The GPL, my kind of sense is that the free software movement was never about being explicitly anti-business. It's more about being pro software sharing. That's really their core value. And it's just kind of an unfortunate side effect for them that pro software sharing also happens to be anti-business. And so for us as kind of like the evil open source person that wants to profit, also, we don't necessarily need to subscribe to the free software movement's ideologies of free software. But we can still use and exploit their license for our evil scheme, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, we're using the GPL because it is, for us, it's conveniently anti-business because of the releasing source clause. And I guess the nuance here and the interesting part is that if a company actually could somehow find a business model where they were actually okay with releasing their source and their modifications, but they did still sell the software commercially, then we would kind of be out of luck. Then they would have really gotten us, because we're relying on this core kind of side effect of the GPL that releasing source is anti-business. But if somehow a business can find a way to make their business work while also releasing source, there's nothing we can do about that. They would be adhering to the GPL, and we would not be able to capture some of their profits back to us. But the idea is that it's pretty uncommon, probably, for a company to be able to actually commercially be successful and commercially sell their source and also release their source. And so so the idea is that in general, this should work. Companies shouldn't be able to use that loophole to sell the software and not pay us. And so companies will be effectively always forced to go use our private commercial license if they want to use the software. So that is the first part of the scheme, but there's a bit of nuance here. And so so the next part comes, the nuance really is related to this relicensing part, or dual licensing. And so in order to implement the dual license, it's actually kind of, we have the project on GitHub or whatever, and it's under the GPL. But we also, and then when someone comes to us for the private license, we relicense that code from GPL to our proprietary license for them. But in order to do that, we need to have full copyright over. We need to either have full. Let me start over. We need to be able to fully relicense the code from GPL to our private one, and there are reasons why we may not be able to do that. And so, for example, and this goes back to the original thing where contributors retain copyrights of their lines of code that they contributed to the project. And so if we're running our GPL project on GitHub, and we're getting some contributions, as soon as we get those contributions, we no longer have full copyright over the project, and we actually no longer have full permission, technically, to relicense the entire project under our private license, because we no longer control the copyright over those lines of code that were committed by the contributors, because they own those copyright lines, and those will be GPL or something. And so to get around this, we actually need to make sure we get permission from those contributors to relicense their code. And we can do this in one of two ways. And so this is always going to manifest as making our contributors sign some kind of extra form. And so this is known as a CLA or a CTA, depending on how we do it. And so basically, if someone contributes to our project, we need to either actually have them transfer their copyright rights to us, or we need to get permission from them to relicense their contribution under a different license. And so that's what our contribution form is going to do. And so if we do a transfer, that's a bit of a actually very heavyweight action, but then we're sound because their copyright is completely transferred to us, and so we can still relicense the entire code base. The CLA route, where they don't transfer the rights, where they still hold the copyright, but they are simply just giving us permission to relicense their changes, is less heavyweight. But it's actually still more heavyweight than kind of a lot of kind of templated, very common CLAs that are used on the internet. And so actually MongoDB goes with the copyright transfer route. And so actually, so there's some real life examples of companies that do this like evil dual licensing thing. So MongoDB is an example, and Qt, the C++ like libraries use this. So MongoDB, they run their project as an open source project under like GPL or their SSPL, but then they also offer private licenses. MongoDB licensing. So yeah, there's like three options. It's like, I guess, yeah, there's their license, and then the commercial licenses are also available, presumably if you want to modify it, use it, and then not release your source, you need to buy a commercial license. And so the way they do this is pretty interesting. GoDB CTA. So they I don't know. There was another link I was looking for, but maybe this Jiro. Oh, I don't want to download that. Anyway, we don't need to go into it necessarily, but the MongoDB, MongoDB has a full-on heavyweight copyright transfer. Yeah, here's the link I was looking for. And so this. Anyway, this actually transfers your rights. So it's they go with the heavyweight route, but Qt actually does a less heavyweight, where they actually do that specific relicense permission. I think OBS is making my computer super slow, including my browser, which is kind of a bummer. But for example, the Apache CLA is very commonly used for open source projects, but you should know that it actually doesn't grant the relicensing permission. And so if you want to implement this scheme, what's in here is actually not enough. You need a bit of a stronger CLA. So here's the relevant part where the subject, you are granted to a blah 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 a license to reproduce blah 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 sub-license and distribute your contributions. And so that's what's saying that when you contribute to this project, you sign this document, and that means you're giving permission to the project to reproduce, to display, to perform, and to sub-license your contribution to the project. But sub-license does not mean relicense, actually. Sub-license, basically it just means kind of forwarding the license to the user. And so the contributor gives permission to the project to forward the license to the user under the same license terms. But relicensing is actually a bit stronger. So sub-licensing doesn't allow the project to remove restrictions from the original license from the contributor. And so the original contributor made a contribution under GPL, which requires you to release source. The project has permission to sub-license that, but sub-licensing will not let them loosen the restriction of releasing source. So this is a bit complicated, but to implement our private licensing scheme, we need to allow our users to not release source. But if we only have permission to sub-license contributions from a user, we do not have permission to loosen that restriction to release source, actually. And so the point is that the Apache CLA, and I think Google has one that's actually almost the same. These commonly used CLAs that only have the sub-license permission are not suitable for dual licensing schemes. And that's why MongoDB and Qt have their own custom contributor agreements. Let's see, Qt agreement. This will be cool to show. The Qt contributor agreement. Okay, hopefully this shows. So the Qt contributor agreement is interesting because it has, this is the clause, and it also says to sublicense make available and distribute contributions or any derivative works under license terms of the Q company's choosing. So now this is what we need, really. This is strong enough. So now we can take the contributors' contributions, which are under GPL or something very restrictive that require releasing source, and now we have permission to completely relicense those changes under an arbitrary, permissive, looser, private commercial license that does not require releasing source. And we can do this because the contributor gave us permission to do this by signing this form and agreeing to specifically this clause, which is absent from the Apache CLA. So this is pretty nuanced, but I think it's important if you want to be really, truly sound for this dual licensing scheme. You need to know that the actual CLA matters and that not all CLAs are going to actually give you everything you need. So that's about dual licensing and CLAs. But after this point, where you've released your project as open source with the GPL, but you stated, but it's also available under a private license, and you require your contributors to sign a CLA, either a CLA type agreement that's like Qt inspired, or a heavyweight CTA that transfers a copyright, like the MongoDB document. Like the MongoDB document. Then you're sound. Then you can operate your open source project, accept contributions as long as they sign it, and then when someone comes along that's like a business that's like, I need to buy a commercial license, you have total permission to relicense the whole code base. And I'll actually just to show you there's some statement here. Yes, copyright assignment. So by submitting a contribution, you assign to MongoDB all rights, blah 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 blah, you have in the contribution. So this is what I'm talking about with the heavyweight thing. This is the most heavyweight version. This is the most heavyweight. Qt is a little bit less heavyweight, but still kind of heavyweight because of this clause. And Apache and Google's one are the least heavyweight because they don't have that relicensing clause. But yeah, that's it. After you've done these things with the dual licensing and the fairly heavyweight CLA, then you're good for operating your evil scheme to make money off of the project while still remaining technically an open source project, which is kind of the key thing. Because at the start we talked about how open source, the definition of open source is technically always allows commercial use. And so if we were to limit ability to use commercially, we would technically not be open source. But with this dual scheme, we can technically still be open source while placing restrictions on commercial use, which is kind of the whole point of resolving these two kind of competing interests. So that's about dual licensing. And so the last thing I want to get into is about these permissive licenses. So let's assume that you thought about copyleft versus permissive, and you said that you want a permissive license ultimately because you want your software to be used more, and you're not that militant about free software being shared all over the place, and so you're ready to choose a permissive license. But you don't know which one to choose. And so I'll just go over the ones that I researched. So there's the MIT BSDs, which are kind of interesting to go through, and Apache license. So again, these are all permissive licenses in Spirit, and so they don't have any of the copyleft releasing source stuff, and they're MIT and they're mostly pretty simple actually. Even though they're legal documents, they're actually designed to be pretty simple, at least for MIT and BSD. Apache is actually kind of a hard to read legal document, but MIT and BSD are kind of easier. And so MIT is like this super famous permissive license. It's super short. And it basically, you place your name and copyright here, and it says anyone that gets this has permission to deal in the software without restriction, to do anything they want without limitation, including these specific permissions that they give, like use blah 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 blah, or sell copies of the software. And so if you do MIT, you are explicitly giving permission people to sell your software basically for their own profit, subject to the following conditions, but there's only one condition, and the only condition is that the above copyright notice and this permission shall be included in all copies or substantial portions of the software. And then the last part is that they have the warranty clause, which is just like, I don't actually claim the software is going to work. You're using it at your own risk, basically. You can't sue me or anything if my software has a bug or crashes or whatever. You can't sue me for that because I'm providing no warranty or support for it. So this is the MIT license, and the interesting points about it are that the license requires the copyright notice to always be included with copies of the software. So this is actually kind of nice. So even though you are releasing your software as an MIT license and you're giving away your ability to capture profits, people can sell it without giving money back to you, at least the people always need to credit you. You always get credit for your work, which is kind of cool. So the above copyright, and so that's guaranteed by this line. And so if someone uses it, they can sell it, but they always need to include this copyright notice, which has your name on it, and so it's effectively crediting you. So that's nice. One differentiating factor between this and the BSD licenses, which we'll look into a little bit, is all the specificity here. The BSDs are more general and don't say that. And something that's worth pointing out is a bit of the ambiguity in here. The above copyright notice and this permission shall be included in all copies or substantial portions of the software. But what does a copy of the software mean? So now is a good point to actually look into BSD, where we'll contrast this. And so the BSD licenses are a very similar type of permissive license. They're also very short, very, very human, non-lawyer readable. And they're very, very similar in spirit, almost interchangeable, but not quite. And so before we dive into it, so in practice, the BSD 3 seems to pretty much be kind of like the best, most commonly used. There's actually a couple other versions, and they only really differ in these list of conditions. And so there's BSD 2, 3, 4 is not really used. There's this one. 4 has this weird clause about giving credit to UC Berkeley or something like that. So that's why it's not in this list. 4 has this weird line about UC Berkeley, I believe. In practice, it's just 2 and 3. But let's just go into 3. So again, copyright line redistribution and use in source and binary forms is permitted, provided that these conditions are met. 1, if you release it and ship it in source code form, you need to retain the copyright notice. So that's similar to what MIT had. Redistributions in binary form must reproduce the copyrights in the documentation or other materials provided with the distribution. So the BSD 3 is much more explicit about this giving credit. It explicitly calls out if you distribute it in source, you need to give credit, and if you distribute it in binary, you also need to give credit. The MIT doesn't do this. The MIT just says you need to give credit in all copies or substantial portions of the software, but it leaves it ambiguous. I'm not sure what a copy of the software means. Is shipping a binary a copy of the software, maybe, or is just releasing your modified code? That's a copy, but is that all you need? And so the BSD is way more explicit about this and says you basically always need to give credit. Whereas with MIT, you might be able to argue the case that shipping the binary does not require giving credit. So if you really care about credit, the BSD is very nice. And lastly, neither the copyright holders or the names may be used to endorse products without written permission. And so this is also kind of nice. It's saying, random people that use the software can't just like use your name at claiming you endorsed them. And so the MIT doesn't have this kind of clause. So the BSD, very explicit about credits, explicit about kind of like trademark names or using names. And it also has a kind of equivalent warranty line. The other interesting part is that it's more general. So MIT had all these specific words it used without limitation, the right to use, copy, modify, merge, publish, distribute, sublicense, blah, 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 blah. It's very explicit. It's more explicit about what it allows. It already says you can deal with it without restriction, use it in any way you want. But explicitly, you can use it, copy, modify, merge, blah, 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 blah. The BSD doesn't go to those extents. It's just saying you can redistribute it, you can ship it, and you can use it without are permitted. And so it doesn't get all poetic with all those words. It leaves it a bit more vague. And so the high level idea is that MIT and BSD3 are extremely similar licenses, but they each have certain parts where they are more vague or less vague than the other one. But in general, they are quite comparable and considered almost identical licenses. But it's good to know about these subtleties like the trademark thing. Maybe you care a lot about the trademark and that being protected by that. Maybe you care a lot about getting credit, and so that might be a reason to use BSD3. So that's MIT and BSD. And to quickly touch on BSD2, BSD is basically the same thing, but just doesn't have that trademark line. I want to show you BSD4 because something about that stood out to me as just really funny. So the BSD4 license, yeah. Okay, maybe I was wrong about the UC Berkeley. I think it originally when this is BSD is from Berkeley, and so yeah, they have this advertising materials line. All advertising materials mentioning features of this software must display the acknowledgement that this product includes software developed by you. And so it has like an advertising clause. So it doesn't, you don't mention Berkeley, but you mention your organization. And so, but originally it was since this Berkeley was the first user of this license, that was the name that was filled in there. But basically, if someone uses your code, they need to 1 and 2 give the credit as usual in the copyright notice. But they also, if they make an ad where if they make a TV ad where they talk about some great features of the software, they need to actually give you credit. They need to literally say that your name in that TV ad or something, and then they have the trademark line saying they can't endorse your name, which I guess is interesting because that's 3 is actually using your name, but 3 is giving them permission and not only giving them permission but requiring them to use your name in ads, and then 4 is saying that's the only case where you can use our names without asking us. So anyway, so that's BSD4. But in practice, people use BSD3 from what I understand. Okay, and then lastly, Apache 2. So the first thing you'll notice is that this is way longer. But so Apache 2 is also a really accepted standard permissive license from the Apache Foundation. And my impression of it is that it's more industrial, like legal strength. It's longer. It's written in like real legalese versus just the very human readable English of the MIT and BSD. And for the most part, it is the same as those. It just states things in more words and more legally sound words. For the most part, it's actually the same, but not quite. And so it's actually not even too hard to really just go through. I mean, it's legalese, but it's actually not super long. But anyway, section 2, grant of license. This is just saying, this is the part of MIT and BSD which like you can do whatever you want with it. You have a license to reproduce, blah 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 blah, sub license, distribute, blah 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 blah. So this is similar to that MIT line where you can, it calls out these things you can do with it. It's free to reproduce, prepare. Yeah, basically you can do what you want. This is the one people talk about with Apache, the patent clause of the Apache license, which is not included in MIT or BSD, but here it's explicitly giving. And so actually, I can't claim to have complete understanding of this, but my general sense is that we, the project, are giving you, the user, explicit permission to use patents that may have been involved with the software. And I believe like companies kind of like this is my understanding. Like it's a nice explicit grant of patent permissions, which doesn't really exist in BSD or MIT, but some argue that it's implicitly there. And so some would argue that the MIT saying you have permission to deal with the software without restriction. And some would argue that this implies ability to have permission to use the patents. It's just without restriction. But the Apache just makes that very clear and explicit. The second part of the clause is this kind of protection mechanism where it's like you have permission to use those patents, so take comfort in that. But if you sue anyone, if you institute litigation against anyone, if you sue anyone alleging that our project constitutes a director infringes on other patents, then we're taking away that permission that we gave you. So it includes this kind of protection mechanism for the project. So there's this patent clause that's basically kind of nice for users, but also has protection for the maintainers of the project itself. So redistribution, this is basically the same thing as those statements in MIT and BSD about giving credit. You can ship, you can reproduce, you can ship the software in source objects, but you need to give those license out. This is actually different. You need to state your changes to all the files. That was not required of MIT and BSD. And so if we envision this kind of long spectrum from permissive to restrictive copyleft, so MIT might actually be all the way on the permissive side because it doesn't even have those trademark naming endorsement things that BSD has. It's like MIT all the way on the permissive side, then a little bit more on, then BSD is a little bit more towards restrictive, then Apache is even more restrictive potentially, and then kind of going over to the copyleft side. But Apache requires people to state changes to the files if they do so, which is a bit more restrictive. You must retain the copyright lines. But what's interesting about this is that you must retain in the source form of any derivative works. And so if you ship the source, yes, you must retain copyright lines, or you must give credit essentially if you ship the source, but it actually doesn't say if you ship binaries, that's not included in this. So my interpretation is that you could actually ship a binary of an Apache 2 software and actually not give credit, and that's not give credit, not mention the copyright line, and that's opposed to BSD, which specifically calls out that you must give credit even in binary, and MIT, which is a bit vague and requires you to arguably give a copy of the copyright line or give credit for a binary distribution or shipping a binary, depending on your interpretation of what copy means here. And so that's actually kind of an interesting quirk. And so I wouldn't necessarily view Apache as all encompassing for MIT and BSD. Actually, there are overlaps for all of them actually. And so Apache 2 has pretty much all encompassing of, or to say it another way, Apache 2 is kind of a subset of MIT and BSD because it has mostly what they have plus the patent stuff, but it actually is also missing some stuff arguably, and so it's missing this strong statement to give credit for binaries, which the BSD has, which is interesting. So if you truly super care about getting credit, then actually BSD 3 might be your best option. But yeah, so it's saying you must give credit for a source distribution. It's much less clear about binaries. This thing, I think you can kind of ignore this specific thing about a notice file. I didn't actually really read it. Also, so Apache explicitly states that contributors, their contributions will be under the same license as the project itself. And this is actually not explicitly really guaranteed, but it's technically possible for a project to accept a contribution and have the contributor contribute under a different license than the whole project itself. So you have like 5 lines that are just under a different license. That's possible for it to happen. Very rare. And especially in the age of GitHub, this thing doesn't, it's less of a concern because GitHub's terms of service actually states that contributions through GitHub are under the same license as the project unless otherwise stated. Let me see if I can pull that up. GitHub contribution, yeah. So GitHub's terms of service actually states, computer is so slow. When you make a contribution to a repository, you license your contribution under the same terms, and you have the right to license under those terms. If you have a separate agreement, that agreement will supersede. So this states that if you use GitHub, you automatically get this kind of protection as a project that says like the contributions are under the license. And this is actually very useful because this actually eliminates the need for a CLA for many projects. Or actually, well, it's kind of like a super lightweight CLA. So the CLA, it basically says that people license the contribution under the same terms, and you have the right, and that they have the right to license your contribution under those terms. And that's one of the things that the CLA typically states explicitly. So it's kind of nice actually that GitHub has that built into their platform as a project maintainer for maintainers. So, but anyway, Apache doubles down on explicitly saying that, which MIT and BSD don't actually. They don't really have any. They don't have any terms for contribution to the project. Actually, they only talk about users of the project and what they're allowed to do and use it. But this is interesting because it's actually a term about contribution, and so you have this nice kind of guarantee that everything's licensed under the same license, just explicitly saying that, which is kind of nice. And that would really, again, be more useful if you're like not on GitHub, but because GitHub already explicitly grants this, but has that, and then it has the line about you can't use our names or whatever, except for certain things. But in general, this matches that BSD 3 line about you can't use the names unless we give you permission, and so that's So that's also captured here. And then you have the warranty thing, liability, blah, blah, blah. And that's where it ends. So the recap of Apache 2 is that it's more heavyweight legal. It's generally a superset of MIT and BSD, with the exception of giving credit for binary distributions, for shipping a binary. It doesn't appear to require that, and it has some extra restrictions like stating changes to the file, and is more explicit about contributions. So that is that's the description of MIT BSD and Apache, the most famous permissive licenses, and the subtle distinctions between them. And the kind of aside that's interesting about Apache is how you actually use the Apache license. For MIT and BSD, you just fill it out and include this text in the license file of your project. But for Apache too, it seems like there's different ways to do it. You can actually include this full text, or it says you can actually include this kind of like short form in your license file, and just link it to, and practice people do it different ways. So like this build kit thing from the Moby project uses Apache 2, and they attach the whole thing. And the funny part is that they literally don't even fill in the year and the name of the copyright owner. And this is actually incredibly common. I was seeing most people just paste this templated thing and don't even fill it in. The real Moby project seems to do it correctly. They choose to provide the full text, they fill it in and stuff. But there are also projects out there that only include this little thing there. So there is a bit of ambiguity there. I actually thought I found a little bug, like loophole in the Apache 2 license related to this, and that's with the clause about providing credit. And so here it says if you redistribute, you must give them a copy of this license. But the license is only this part with these like 1 through 10 requirements. It doesn't actually include this little snippet at the bottom. That's not part of like the license. Like this part up here is the license. This part down here with the copyright line is not the license. And so so I technically thought that if you chose to have this be in your license file, then the person that used it would actually not be required to give you credit, because that 4A line only says you must give people the license, which doesn't include the copyright line. It's just these 9 sections up here. But then I saw line on 3 that includes the direct thing about copyright. So that's actually not like a loophole or anything. But I thought I found a loophole because there's this apparently kind of confusion about how you actually are supposed to use the license. And it seems that what they're talking about down here is for including the license in your actual code files, like in the top 20 comment lines of the file. You include this because it says you may not use this file. So that suggests to me that this part is actually not for the license file in your project. It's actually for your code files, because it also talks about comment syntax. So that's kind of something that's a bit confusing about the Apache license. Again, like this stuff doesn't actually really matter for the most part. It's just kind of like technicalities. But that's the Apache license. And that's everything I know about software licensing. That's copyright, how when you make code, you own it by yourself, and you need licenses to give people permission to use it. But then you have a choice of copyleft or copyright, depending on how you feel about whether the changes should be shared to everyone, or if you don't care about that and you just want the code to be used as freely as possible in the world, There's all these different options for copyleft and copyright. GPL 2 and 3, AGPL. I didn't talk about, but there's Mozilla's public copyleft license. And yeah, I didn't mention it, but basically all the copyleft licenses like GPL 2, 3, and AGPL are all from the Free Software Foundation. But there's actually Mozilla has a copyleft license and they're not the Free Software Foundation. I don't know too much about the Mozilla's license, but it's another option that people use. And there's the permissive side, MIT, BSD, Apache are the famous ones. They're all largely the same, but have their own quirks. Then that discussion about dual licensing and making money, how actually being able to sell the software is guaranteed by open source, by the definition of open source. And you actually need to kind of use a tricky loophole if you want to both be open source, but also require people to buy commercial licenses if they use it for profit. And so, yeah, you need to have the dual licensing scheme, but you also need to set up a CLA with some specific things in it that give you the right to relicense the contributions. So you need to either have the transfer agreement or the cute style, slightly more heavyweight relicense clause. Sub-licensing is not enough. So that's dual licensing and making money. And I guess actually the last thing I'll show is that on GitHub I found some kind of interesting projects from Facebook research that that have a non-commercial license that explicitly say you can't use this commercially. It's so slow. Maybe this is it, but a lot of it is MIT though. But there's hope. But Facebook Research actually released some things under this Creative Commons non-commercial license. So this goes back to the discussion about, is it open source or not? And so these projects, like this project, maybe this one too, Facebook Research seems to release their research artifacts under this Creative Commons non-commercial, not everything. So this is actually under BSD3. They use BSD3 a lot. But they have multiple projects that are under this Creative Commons non-commercial license, which is really interesting because that actually means that these are not open source projects. Even though they're released publicly on GitHub and apparently have pull requests, these are technically not open source projects because they do not permit commercial use. And so that is a final interesting thing about this whole investigation, that there are certain projects out there that use the Creative Commons explicitly non-commercial use, and as such they're technically not open source. And so going back to the dual licensing thing, maybe instead of GPL versus instead of GPL and a private license, which makes you vulnerable to the loophole where someone could release their source and sell the software and you can't do anything about it. You could alternatively use a true Creative Commons non-commercial license or a commercial license, which closes that loophole. Now a company that wants to sell the software, their only option is to get the commercial license if they want to sell it, because the only other one is Creative Commons non-commercial, which prevents selling. And so in this case, it really depends on how much you care about being a technically true open source project. If you really care about being technically open source, you would need to use the GPL dual licensing scheme and make yourself vulnerable to the loophole. But if you don't actually care about meeting that true definition of open source, you could feasibly use the Creative Commons non-commercial license and close that loophole. Yeah, so it depends on how much you care about open source and how much you care about that loophole. And And so yeah, and the other thing is that so MongoDB clearly didn't care. It wasn't important. Meeting that true definition of open source was actually not that important to them, because they continue to use their SSPL license even though it was rejected by the OSI. So they continue to be a project on GitHub that accepts contributions, as far as I know. But they're just technically not open source anymore because of their SSPL license. So that is everything I know about software licensing.